Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Welcome to this episode of the Rethink Leadership podcast with my guest Andy Ayim MBE. He's a leadership advisor, entrepreneur and storyteller committed to democratizing leadership practices and creating meaningful cultural shifts within organizations. After all, it is a people business. Through his work, Andy equips leaders to build human-centered workplaces that inspire confidence, foster inclusion and remove obstacles that prevent teams from thriving. He himself is a leader who practices what he preaches day in, day out, and that's what we talk about further. We're proud to make this episode in aid of Power the Fight and his charity of choice to end violence against young people globally. Andy, hi, thanks for joining me. Please tell us about yourself, your work, and what was it like growing up nurtured by diversity in London and through all of your travels?
Sure. So I'll start with the end and work my way backwards. So I'm an inclusive leadership coach, which means that I work with leadership teams and management teams on how to foster an environment where everyone feels like they belong, because I'm a firm believer that if people feel seen and heard, they're going to perform better and the business is going to do better. It's all about caring about the people. And if I kind of take a step back, I grew up in North London in Tottenham, which is a super multicultural ward. You know, you had Turkish, Somalian, French, Scottish friends. So I was molded, I feel like, by diversity and inclusion. It's only really when I entered into the world of work where I felt like two worlds were colliding. And suddenly the world of work looked very different to this community that I kind of grew up in. I was very keen to create pathways for more people like myself into that world, but also create an environment in that world where anyone can join and thrive. And that's the work that's really driven and motivated me to do what I do today.
And just the words that I'm hearing from you, belonging, being seen, being heard, being human, really is the red thread that goes with you, doesn't it? And I know that you've used a lot of that through your career as well, in particular, bringing humanity back to the heart of leadership. So, how have you done that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, I kind of started my career in management consulting, which was really great foundation for understanding how businesses worked, but also made me realize there's certain rules of engagement and there's certain things that are almost like unspoken language on how you conduct yourself in a professional environment. It's not the kind of thing that you learn in school either. So like if you don't have a mentor or a father or an auntie who's worked in that environment, it can be quite a minefield trying to figure out how to almost like assimilate and belong in that culture. So I went from consulting into investing into startups. And that was fascinating for me because I feel like when you work with entrepreneurs, they're molding culture like wet clay. They're able to mold it because they're so influential because it's early days in a business. When you work with leaders in massive businesses, that clay is quite hard. It's quite difficult then to mold that clay again and to wet it again. So with entrepreneurs, I love the fact that at an early stage, you can really influence the culture and shape the type of environment that you wanted. And I loved that. And again, I thought I was investing in businesses when really I was investing in people, because people are at the heart of what makes a business thrive, what makes people look forward to work, what makes people create products because they care about customers. Is all about human connection, right? In connecting with people, connecting with the problem, it leads to a better connection with your customers and better performance. So I guess throughout my career, even before exclusively just working on inclusive leadership, it's always been around that human connection.
Yeah, you're right. And it does bring in that diversity, equity, and inclusion as those three different lenses and the power of all three coming together and what that means. And I like what you said there in many, or in my words, we don't invest in businesses, we invest in people. That's a great one I'm going to
Absolutely.
be using now going forward
Fantastic.
as well, I have to say.
And I love what you
Um,
said about equity, diversity, and inclusion, because I always say like diversity is having all these different types of people around the dance floor. Inclusion is letting everyone come and dance, and equity is telling the DJ to play all these different genres of music, right? That's what it looks like to have a fair party.
exactly right. I love that. I love that definition as well. So if you bring those two together, then we might as well put those together now. The DEI lens, that piece around the humanity, and that we're all the human race essentially. So we can take almost those lenses away. Why is it so important, Andy? And what's the data telling us around the benefits of getting it right and the cost of not doing it well or not doing it at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I was reading some data actually even this week from Gallup that suggested that um, 74% of managers feel underprepared or undertrained when going into management. And the CMI Chartered Management Institute state that I think it was up to 85% of their survey participants were accidental managers. And what's happened in a lot of those cases is that as an individual, you are in an organization as a subject matter expert and you're really good at your tasks, such as digital marketing, but then you realize there's only a single path for progression and it requires you to become a people manager. So whether you want to manage people or not, it's the only way for me to progress, to get a pay rise, to get to the next rank within that organization. So what we see in a lot of organizations, these people are promoted to managers without having the people capabilities that you'd expect. And as a consequence, who suffers are the people that are hired into their team. And it's not necessarily their fault. They're just really underprepared, and there's not an individual contributor track for them to progress into in the organization. So we often hear that people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And that's sadly true. The actual influencer in an organization isn't actually on social media, it's your manager who's managing that team. And you notice it's a different experience depending on who's my manager, which is why it's so critical. I believe so much in really upskilling managers so they learn how to care, be active listeners, meet people where they are, and support them. It's not about having all of the answers, right? Like who are you going to side with, Palestine or Israel? No. It's about understanding how to care for someone, hear them out, and support them, regardless what their views are. And that subtle shift is the difference in my experience in feeling like I can thrive in this team versus actually I have a loss of motivation because I'm not recognized and actually would rather leave this company.
Yeah, the people the people that are good at tasks, they're great salespeople, they're great operational people. They come into management and they become administrators and problem solvers or super operators. We're not growing our people. We're not giving them the skills to manage those
Mm,
people. So you're right. So it's a double whammy of risk.
precisely.
You're not getting the best out of your people, and nobody really is going to be happy in those roles either. And I see that time and time again. And you're so right that the manager's the key influence is in the middle of the organization there. So you want
Mhm.
them to influence positively, don't you? And I totally get what you're saying around, therefore, this is what we've got to do about it. But this often fails in the implementation. And it
Yeah.
is all about people, your most important resource. So if I put you on the spot a little bit here, Andy, how do you bring all of this together for leaders? And whether it's in business or communities, so that they can make progress.
Yeah, it's a great question. At the heart of my approach, I'm always trying to focus not on the strategy or the systems or the culture, but the individual. I always start my work with really focusing on the individuals in the room, understanding what their beliefs are, understanding the things that are beneath the surface. Edward D. Hall wrote a book called Beyond Culture. And in that book, he talks about this concept called the iceberg theory. Above the iceberg is everything that you can see. It's what I experience with you at work. It's how you behave, it's how you act, it's what you say. But beneath the iceberg is everything that drives that external expression. It's your beliefs, your attitudes, your values, like how you grew up and how those key moments have shaped who you are. So if I don't know what lies beneath the surface, I can misinterpret what you're saying or how you're showing up. So I always try and start with the individual and really understand actually what I call their shiny and unshiny story. The shiny story is the accolades, is what you introduce yourself as when you go to a networking party. Hi, I'm Andy, got an MBE in 2020. I've worked as a management consultant as well as a venture capitalist, and now I work with leaders across the globe. It's really shiny, but people don't really connect with that. If anything, it creates more distance between me and them. It almost creates an artificial stage between us and me and them. So what I love to share is my unshiny story. I did grow up in Tottenham. I had challenges growing up. I was blessed with two parents in the household. I had a sister that I've been a carer for years. It's these kind of human things that people find common strands in. And that's what makes people feel like, because Andy's led the way in being vulnerable and opening up, that's given me permission to open up more with him. So when those tough times come where, my son is sick and I'm coming to work and I'm a bit tired and frustrated, I can share that with you rather than keep that to myself and you misinterpret it as poor performance. And those are the differences when you have human connection at the individual level before talking about the compound impact on a cultural level.
And that's ultimately where it's going to tick, isn't it? As the culture evolves with this and the people start to drive that culture. I do resonate with the shiny and unshiny story. That's a great way of
Mm.
putting it, actually. So that's how we might engage the leaders and managers. But if we're then talking to the leaders and managers themselves, what would be your advice to them when you're not involved around supporting, empowering, and upskilling their people?
I think one of the key undervalued traits that I see in managers is not a lot of managers are great listeners. And it's because they have a lot going on in here in their heads when they're thinking. They're managing upwards, they're managing downwards, they have their tasks to do, they have a to-do list that they're never going to get through. So what happens is when we get into a one-to-one situation between manager and person that they're managing, the manager has their own agenda in their head before the person's even finished talking. But the act of active listening means that I see you, which means that I just want to be quiet for a couple of minutes. People struggle with this. Just 2 minutes of being quiet and listening to what Jeremy is saying. And after I've heard what Jeremy is saying, to ensure that I understood what he has said, I'm going to play it back to him using his own language. That means that I'm present in this conversation. Once I've done that and Jeremy continues to have that conversation with me, I'm going to probe and ask questions to understand Jeremy, not to be understood, because I'm not trying to get my own agenda across. I'm really trying to empathize and step into your shoes. After doing that, my last call is always, okay, based on what you've shared and my understanding of what you've shared, how can I support you? This simple layer on how to have a better conversation is a game changer in people feeling finally that this person sees me and hears me and is here for me versus this person's come with their own agenda before this meeting's even started. So having better conversations at the heart of better collaboration and my better feeling of belonging in this team.
And my replaying of that conversation that you've just given a summary was I see you, I hear you, I understand you, and I'm going to support you on your terms. Fair?
Absolutely. Very fair. And I love what you said at the end there. I'm going to support you on your terms. The mistake we hear often is treat people the same or treat people equally.
Hmm.
No, everyone is different. So you need to treat people differently based on how they want to be treated. But I have no idea how they want to be treated if I don't get to know who they truly are.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And you're right, that just stopped me a little bit because I am guilty of saying, everybody's in the same boat. We're all
Mm, it,
equal here,
it comes from a
but
good place.
yeah, it does. That's the what, isn't it? But the how we then execute behind that has to be much more tailored.
Yeah.
Um, so for people like me that need to do better than Andy, he said, putting himself in the middle there, what would be three top tips that you could leave with the leaders tuning in that feel they could do a little bit more in this way so that they can accelerate progress?
Yeah, I think something that I think is a core belief of mine is compounding, the law of habits. Like if I'm able to do a small action each day, marginal gains is going to lead to those incremental actions that compound and have a huge result if I do it consistently. So I always tell leaders, start simple, whether it's a post-it note on your laptop or time that you block in your diary regularly, just remind yourself of things like active listening, see, hear,
Mm,
speak, like what we just mentioned just now.
yeah.
Remind yourself of actually when I'm on board someone new into the team, let me lead the way in being vulnerable and sharing my shiny and unshiny story. That's something we can all do today,
Mm,
right? And I think the third thing is really for people to empathize also with you. It's good to be a bit more transparent around like what are some of your anxieties, some of your pressures, some of the things that you're holding so that your team can understand what it means to be in leadership. right? We used to hear a lot about servant leadership, but we don't talk enough about situational leadership. You're going to have to change how you lead different people in different ways. It's one of
Mm.
the things I love about sometimes when I hear the story of Alex Ferguson, he used to manage Man United, and he used to greet people in the canteen, the receptionist, the players, and he would ask questions like, how's your grandma who's in hospital? The reason he can ask that question is because he's got to know each individual personally. It's not about just the football, it's about the individual. Because guess what? When you care at that level about the individual, they're going to show up and go the extra mile when it comes to working with you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that personalization and that understanding of people is important. Although I have seen managers I've worked with and leaders go slightly too far, and then you know who their favorites are. So it becomes
Mm,
less equal. Does that make sense,
yeah,
Andy?
absolutely. Friendships in the workplace can be complex because in many workplaces, whether we like it or not, there's a dominant culture and a non-dominant group, right? And there's this fight always for this non-dominant group to be acknowledged or get into that dominant group. And the experience when you're not in that dominant group can be awful. Like I'm not going pubs, so I'm not getting to do the deals. I'm not in that social, and therefore I'm missing out on these opportunities. I'm not in this women's leadership program. How are people selected for that program? Is it through that favoritism? So there's something to be said about how we communicate better as leaders across the board, and create that platform so that it isn't ring fence those singular social activities, but everyone has equal opportunity on how you can get access to these opportunities. I think something that a lot of companies are wrestling with now is hybrid work, you know right? They're really thinking intentionally around, like, how are we actually designing this workspace? If I've got the legal team sitting here, shouldn't we have meeting rooms that are soundproof given the confidential nature of their work? If I'm having people in the office but there's not enough seats, actually maybe I should have more meeting spaces that are small booths that you can't book, so that there's spaces for them to have these little micro conversations, right? If I'm having people in the office more, I should create more learning and development opportunities, guest speakers, reasons for them to come in and connect, right? So we need to be more intentional around what it means to come into the office, given that so many people have become more comfortable remote working through COVID. And I don't think a lot of companies have done a great job with that transition.
Yeah, you're right. And now in fact some companies, notably American companies, are backtracking on that, saying it's back in the office, and I think
5 days a week, yeah, and then that feels like a head teacher almost, right?
that's
It
right.
creates that
You're telling.
parent-child relationship. Yeah,
It is, and employees are saying, actually, no, thank you very much. I'm quite happy doing my 3 days at home and two in the office. It
yeah,
works really
yeah,
well. We can
absolutely.
collaborate. It's often the organizations that haven't upskilled the organization, upskill people in the way of working in that environment, having the right technology to underpin it, to drive the communication, the one-to-one conversations. You can actually do so much more than many
Yeah,
organizations are doing. Would you agree?
absolutely. I fully agree, and I'm a big fan of slowing down before speeding up. I think with matters like this, organizations do a poor job of understanding how people feel and co-creating the future with people. Instead, they rush and just dictate what needs to be done and get the backlash off that. So there's a Guardian article a few weeks ago about Starling Bank and how the CEO was mandating that people should go back into the office. I believe it was like 10 days a month. And people were outraged because some people had moved to Brighton and lived in different parts of the country, knowing that they didn't have to go into the office. So it impacted or influenced their decision to even join the company. And then you learn that there's around 3,000 people in the business, but only 500 seats in the offices. So there's not enough seats even for the people to go in. And actually, all of this could have been managed a lot better if we just had better conversations and co-created a future that we wanted for ourselves, right? And if we started from a place of truth, the truth is, I've got a long lease on this building and it's very expensive, and I want to utilize it to the best of our ability. So, how can we make coming in more pleasurable, and how can we utilize our space in this building? That leads to better brainstorming, ideation, and co creation rather than dictating a future that nobody wants to inherit.
Yeah, so right. That's where opinions versus the truth, and
Yeah,
somebody at the very top saying, and it is often at the very top saying, no, this isn't working because of perceptions, feelings, not necessarily facts, and not necessarily around, well, how are you going to implement that? Because we've got less seats than we've got people coming in, and we're not only we're not only now annoying people by announcing this. As soon as they get to the office and they've got to stand up all day, they're going to be even more annoyed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Jeremy, just on this topic, I think one poignant conversation that I see on every conference nowadays is about AI and the threat of AI. And we've made the biggest mistake yet again as people in recognizing that it's not about the technology, it's about how we collaborate better. The technology should be an enabler for us to connect better. How does AI enable us to connect better online? How does AI take some of these administrative duties so we can spend more time socially getting to know each other as a team? These are the kind of ways that we need to frame AI in how to solve problems that we're facing today, rather than treating AI like the golden ticket and solution for all of the issues that we face today.
Yeah, and it often though betrays a misunderstanding of what AI is and isn't in organizations, particularly at leadership level and throughout the organization actually in some ways of run to the hills, AIs are taking our jobs or robots are coming in, all of those kind of things. But where organizations have got it right, you're right, it's invisible because it enables
Yeah,
the human touch, and that's the secret, isn't
absolutely.
it, really?
Absolutely. Is that the age of technology has always come with this fear. Oh no, mobile phones, what's that going to do to work? It supplemented it. It didn't replace our need for using our desktops and our laptops, right? Technology's always been very complementary. I think the difference with AI actually is the fact that there's so much human bias that's gone into programming AI. AI that's learning off the internet, which is a lot more darker than people think, right? Getting trained by Reddit, getting trained by comments on YouTube, getting trained by all of these negative sides of the internet that are going into training these AI. So we have to remember like the biggest flaw with AI is actually humans, because we're flawed ourselves. So if we're training this AI and it's a biased data set because it's so narrow and there's only a few middle class white men that have really trained the majority of this AI, then it's never going to be built for all of our solutions. So we actually need to really fast track how we can like really train AI on the rest of society and the rest of the world. How can women in Philippines be represented in AI? How can someone in a favela in Brazil be represented in AI? And that's the bigger challenge, I think, for us today.
Yes, it is. And the organizations that understand that do not take an off-the-shelf AI for that very
Mm,
reason. They understand that they have to build it from the ground up. And yes, they can use parts of those technologies, but it has to be built into a character behind a framework. It has to
absolutely.
be educated, whether it's in a legal sector setting, a financial services, a community, a favela in Rio, wherever it is. It
Absolutely.
has to be tailored to the approach. Gosh, I could talk about this all
Well
day,
said.
Andy, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. And I know not just me, but many of those listening will be wanting to find out more about what you do and also connect with you to continue the discussion. How do they do that?
Yeah, I think the number one way is just to follow me on LinkedIn, because I share a lot of these topics in conversations through our posts like you do, Jeremy, and I love engaging with yours as well. And then, of course, I've got a newsletter as well on andyayim.com. And I'd love to connect with anyone who wants to have this conversation about the challenges their leadership team faces and how they can build better human connection in their teams.
Fantastic. Well, Andy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.